Hi, Mr. Owen. How are you?
I'm very good, thanks. How are you doing?
Thank you very much for accepting my invitation. It's real pleasure to have you in this space. My name is Juan Bautista. I'm software engineer from Colombia. I'm
Mhm.
passionate about science and technology in this
Great.
topic especially. With me the last year at the Pragma offices in Colombia.
Mhm. Yes, okay.
Okay, Mr. Owen. Before we start, could you please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about who Owen Woods when he's not working as a software architect or a speaker?
Sure. My name is Eoin Woods. I've been in software engineering of one sort or another for about 13 years now. So I'm quite experienced. Graduated from university from a bachelor's in 1990, so a lot of work experience. Today I'm an independent consultant, but in my career I spent about more than 10 years developing software products. I then worked in finance systems, and then I worked in software engineering services for 10 years as a CTO. And today I'm an independent consultant. Outside work, I have a 21-year-old who is at university studying computer science, perhaps of no surprise to anyone, but it was to me. That takes a bit of my time. And my big interest outside work is music. I play the trumpet, and that takes quite a lot of my time. I play with a number of different styles of musical group locally to me here in the UK.
What has surprised you the most about AI?
What has surprised me about AI? I suppose the speed of the speed of change in that industry, and how after a number of years of quite slow and steady progress, it appeared that suddenly applying scale to models was having quite dramatic improvements in their capabilities. And the other thing that took me by surprise was how fast the coding agents emerged. I was fully expecting semi-autonomous coding agents. I don't think everybody was, but they went from, as you will remember, from being very, very simple things, basically, autocomplete with a bit more intelligence, suddenly leapt into tools like Claude Code and Codex. And all that happened really within 6 months. That I was finding quite surprising. The other thing I'm quite surprised about is how it seems today that outside coding and a couple of what are really NLP applications, sentiment analysis, summarization, text generation, how there seem to be relatively few mainstream uses for LLMs that are being universally applied. It appears people haven't discovered those things that they can just do. I'm also quite surprised about that.
That's interesting. What technology excites you the most today?
What excites me the most? I think the ability that AI in general, not necessarily large language models, AI in general gives us a completely rethinking how people interface with software systems. The fact that voice, image recognition, video processing are all now quite practical and relatively inexpensive to do, allows us to really think again about how people interact with their machines. I don't think it's a case of keyboards are going away. I don't, because keyboards are really optimized for certain kinds of work. But what I think the researchers haven't maybe worked out yet, and certainly the industry hasn't worked out, is how you blend these different input mechanisms and output mechanisms together to form a really sort of multimodal, compelling user experience. I think that's going to emerge in the next couple of years.
Is there any technology that you think people are overestimating today?
I think it's very hard to know where the whole large language model thing is going to land. They're clearly a step change in what we can use AI for certain kinds of tasks. But as I mentioned before, I suppose the surprise is that we're now, 3 years in? We haven't yet really settled on mainstream non-text processing tasks that everyone can just do. I mean, the startup that is going to revolutionize an industry with large language models has not yet really had lots of success. So I think it's quite hard to know where they're going to land. And I think the cost model is currently very unproven. We all know, I mean, it's all very murky. The vendors won't talk about costs really, but we know that currently all of our use of these models is massively subsidized by investor money. That's not going to continue forever. So I think there is a danger that some people are massively underestimating. Some people are very critical of the whole industry and don't believe it will amount to anything. I don't think that could possibly be true. But there are a lot of people just assuming it will continue linearly to get faster, cheaper, better. That's not obvious to me at all that that's going to happen. And so I think there's groups of people who are overestimating what large language models can do. I think that's the technology uppermost in my mind. The other one on a very much sort of smaller level would be probably the rush that there was a few years ago to microservices. I think that's just now sort of starting to be understood for an overcompensation, and people are starting to make better decisions about what granularity of runtime component they need in their system. And I think that's really, really healthy. And that people like Sam Newman and Simon Brown, of course, and Martin Fowler and many other people much more eminent than me have made this point repeatedly. And I think people are starting to listen to it, which I think is very sensible.
Interesting. Okay, in this session, software architect. What part of software architect's job will AI change the most?
Mm-hmm. I think it's one part of the software architect's job is understanding the system in its entirety at a technical level. And I think AI is capable of doing a good job at assisting with that and saving huge amounts of time in that. So I think actually you can structure it to a number of areas. It changes the software architect's job quite considerably in terms of the solutions that they can now think about to problems, because we can now deal with unstructured data, unpredictable inputs, non-deterministic kind of behavior, and all that's now available. Then there's it changes the software, the whole business of guiding software development, because we've now got mixed human and AI teams. So the software architect has to think about how you guide AI agents, not just how you communicate with people. And then in their own job, of course, it makes assessment and monitoring of software systems much easier. Or certainly does a lot of the work if you know what you wanted to do. I also think it's fantastic at sifting and organizing information. When software architects before have had to perhaps understand a government regulation, and it's taken hours and hours and hours, and you've had to talk to 4 specialists, and now you can pretty well feed it into an LLM and say, pull out the most important aspects of this for a software system automating the ordering process, and it will do a pretty good job at it. You probably need to also go and talk to an expert, but in terms of giving a first view, it just makes it so much quicker.
Okay. Which part of your work still need a human?
Well, LLMs aren't going to... Actually, I think in the software architecture job, most of it needs a human, actually. LLMs replay things that they've seen before, and that might be fine. But things I'm observing that LLMs aren't very good at is making trade-offs, which is fundamental to software architecture. LLMs are not terribly good at, I don't think can deal at all with conflicting stakeholder groups. You can't send an LLM to go and talk to the security group for you. You can't get an LLM to negotiate between the customer-facing group and the compliance group about what changes to make to the user interface. You can't send an LLM off to talk to the corporate database team about the fact that you want to use a new database model and why, and then have a nuanced conversation about, actually, why don't you do it this way with the existing technologies? All those kind of conversations that software architects have all the time. I also don't think that LLMs can guide teams to align on their decision-making and understand their prioritization correctly. And I certainly don't think LLMs can help very much with organizing work. I don't so much mean management there, but leadership. You wouldn't put an LLM in as a leader. I mean, to make sure that a team is moving in a coherent direction and is, managing their technical debt and all those things. I think most of the software architect's day-to-day job, they might use an LLM personally to help them, as I said, process information, summarize things, perhaps produce multiple presentations of one piece of information. Super useful for that. They don't fundamentally replace the activities that we do all day.
Interesting, I agree. Do you think software architecture is becoming more important because of AI?
I've seen this argued both ways, actually. That it no longer matters because we'll just generate all the code and then throw it away if it's wrong and generate it again. Or when you've got AI agents and if they aren't guided architecturally, you'll just end up with a mess. I think there is an element of truth in both. It depends on the context. I think AI agent-based tools give us an unprecedented ability to create either very tactical pieces of software or throwaway prototypes. We can do that really, really fast. I've done that a few times myself recently. I've just wondered, how would you write this? I can sit down and figure it out, but I could just get Claude Code to produce a first cut. And I might not totally agree with every decision, but it just helps you explore a space. Brilliant at that. And realistically, suppose you have a 2 million line of code payment processor in a credit card company. You're not going to regenerate all that code every time because you think it's got a bit old. The risks of changing it are very, very high. So I think in certain aspects, the more disposable software, the architecture probably is less important than it was. Maybe it was never very important, but actually for the long-lived software, it is actually more important in the sense that a group of, say, 6 or 8 people in a room could have an intuitive understanding of the architecture and continue developing it in roughly the same architectural style, roughly the same constraints, roughly the same priorities, without writing loads of stuff down. If you've got 8 people and 4 agents, or 12 agents, the agents have no idea about the conversation in the room. So actually formalizing it a bit and getting it into the agent configuration suddenly becomes super important.
Okay. Are software systems becoming simpler or more complex because of AI? What do you think?
Oh, more complex. I think if there's one thing that I have observed that agent-based systems don't do, it's tidy up after themselves and do the simplest thing possible. Now, to be fair, lots of humans don't do that either. I'm sure you've seen that in some of your clients when you've inherited code bases and everything's duplicated everywhere. But good teams, like I'm sure the ones at Pragma, they're constantly challenging themselves. Is this the simplest way to do it? Or we've seen this before, we need to refactor this out into a library. Or that's a really ugly piece of code. We need to come back to that. It'll work, we can release it for now, but we need to come back to that and tidy it up. I don't observe that that's really a strength of large language-based models. I think that you can tell them to go and do something, and they might refactor something to be simpler, yes, but they sort of need to be given the work list and told and driven to what you mean by simple. And their preference is to generate more, not remove code and refactor to less. So I think it's left unchecked. There's a whole new level of software complexity could emerge, and probably will, because a lot of people are just using them as a sort of accelerator pedal to just produce more code, in the view that more code is good, less code is bad, which I don't think either of us would think is a very sensible approach.
Yes, I think it's more complex and expensive because the current cost AI is
every
very
line of code costs money, doesn't it, over the long term? And that's, I think, what a lot of people are missing. Unless you really are going to throw it away, every line of code costs you money in the long term.
Yes. What architecture principle have never changed?
What architecture principle has never changed? Well, I think make everything as simple as possible. If you're looking for a universal principle, that has always been the case and is the case now. As we've just said, AI tools are not very good at it. And I don't see that ever changing because the simplest, smallest thing you've got is going to be the easiest to maintain in the long term, will be easiest to change, and will be cheapest to look after.
Okay. If you have to teach only one architecture principle to a junior engineer, what would you be it?
I think it's a sort of way of working thing to juniors. What I'm always trying to say to them is understand the problem really well before worrying about the solution, because a lot of people hear the bullet points of the problem and jump to an assumed solution because they've read about it or it's the only one they know. Frankly, there are people who will just jump to the one solution they always use, or because they want to experiment, or whatever the reason, they jump to a solution. It's actually understanding the problem in quite a lot of depth. You don't have to understand every detail, but you do have to understand, for example, its fundamental structure, and by that I mean domain structure, really the problem's space structure, and you have to understand the system qualities, quality attributes, non-functionals, which you're going to need. And until you understand those well, it's very hard to know if you've got a good solution.
Okay. What architecture mistake do you see most often today?
I'd say, I don't know if it's a pure architecture mistake, but the thing that I see time and time again is assuming that technical debt can be paid back later. The longer you leave it, the harder it is to pay it back, the more it increases and the more it slows you down. Whereas many teams, often driven by their product owners, to be fair, not the team, behave as if the opposite was true, as if it will get cheaper to repay over time, so we'll let it build up and we'll repay it in 2 years' time. And they're just making it more difficult. So I'd say in terms of architecture, as in curating your code base, I'd say letting technical debt keep on running and possibly get out of control. That's probably the one I keep seeing in almost every kind of environment, from very technical computing, scientific compute, right through to mobile apps at the other end.
Are we entering an era where thinking is becoming more valuable than programming?
I would argue thinking's always been more valuable than programming. You need both. But if somebody insists on programming without thinking first, just going back to the problem, understanding the problem, they're unlikely to produce the best solution or even a really good solution. So yes, I think some of the fundamental skills that I got from a computer science degree over 30 years ago that I still use today are the ability to think critically and to structure problems in terms of domain entities, and to understand relationships between both conceptual and physical components. It's all of that sort of thinking, and extending that into systems thinking. It's those skills I think are super important, always have been. Are they still important today? Yeah, definitely. And as I think you're hinting at, now that we've got machines can do a lot of the programming, I think those skills really become they're some of what differentiates really good software developers.
Okay, thanks. In this section is developers and careers. Mm-hmm. What skills should junior developer focus on today? What do you think?
I think there are a range. I mean, software development's like any professional job. It's not single dimensional. There are a range. They do need really fundamental, good quality, low-level design and implementation skills. Even if they've got an AI engine, working for them, they need to understand how to do that themselves. At the other end, as we've just discussed, they need really good problem analysis, understanding, critical thinking skills. And I think I've always observed that software developers need pretty good human skills. And many of us did not have human skills when we started out as graduates. For me, exactly the opposite. I was very poor at that, and I think I'm a bit better now. And that's something sometimes the graduates themselves don't necessarily recognise, that the people skills are actually really important, not just to being promoted and getting ahead. Yes, those things are important, but actually just in being an effective member of a team who can work with the people who are consuming your software. you need the ability to communicate with people, empathize with them, work with them constructively.
Very good. Will companies still need many junior developers in the future?
Well, this is a really interesting question, isn't it? I think the short answer is I don't know, really. My intuition is, well, clearly they need enough to supply the mid-level and senior developers that they're going to continue to need. I suppose the question is, historically, there's been this pyramid effect where you have whatever it might be, 5 juniors to a mid-level developer, 5 mid-level developers to a senior, 5 seniors to a principal. I'm not sure if perhaps rather than quite such a pyramid, perhaps the pyramid narrows today. Perhaps if we can get teams to be much more productive with AI, and not all are, but some are, it would seem that the AI is doing a lot of the jobs that juniors historically did. So we're bringing juniors in not really for their raw output, but more for their future potential. So perhaps then there could be less juniors in a specific organisation. On the other hand, I could see more organisations now believing that they can develop software because it's cheaper to do. So they will all need juniors. So I'm relatively optimistic that actually after a couple of years, all this will end up in a positive place for juniors again. But I think short term, it's very unknown. And there is a possibility that the market for juniors will shrink somewhat permanently.
Okay. If you were starting your software career today, what would you learn first?
Gosh, well, I like to learn everything, so I don't know where I would start exactly. I'm really fascinated by design, and I think if I was a graduate and I hadn't been taught it, I'd try and learn domain-driven design as my first thing. As I've just said, so the thing I should go and learn first is actually dealing with stakeholders, who stakeholders are. Most graduates don't know even the term. So work out the fact that many people care about my software and get some skills in dealing with them. But in fact, what I'd want to do, I'd want to go and learn domain-driven design.
Okay. Okay. In this section is AI in daily work. Okay, it's your turn. Do you use AI every day?
Yes, yeah, I do.
For example, which AI tool do you use the most?
So I use the tools from Anthropic. I'm sure all the others are great, but I'm a micro company, so I just have to make a decision. So I made a decision. I went to Anthropic, very pleased with it. So I use the Claude chat interface along with some skills quite regularly. For example, a really mundane level saves me loads of time. I collect receipts in emails for transport costs, which I can claim back from my little company, and I have a skill that Claude can take a zip file of emails and it turns it into an expense report for me, turns all the emails into PDFs, produces a single big PDF, and I just drop that in a shared folder. And if I need to refer to that in the future for tax reasons or anything, I can just go and do it. It saves me hours every couple of weeks. Very mundane. I use it a lot for critiquing stuff I produce. So I don't actually use any predefined prompts or skills for that. I build often quite long prompts every time because the context tends to be different. But yes, I'll feed it a document, a presentation, a conference talk. I'll explain what I'm trying to achieve. I'll explain what I think is good and bad about it. I'll ask it to review it and then debate it with me. And then I often disagree with it. So I'll say no for the following reasons, and it has another think. Sometimes comes back and defends its position. Sometimes comes back and just says, yes, you're right. Aren't you wonderful? And I try and persuade it not to do that. I've got quite a lot in my Claude context prompt about who I am and why I like to work. And then the third thing I use it for, obviously, I do use Claude Code. So I use Claude Code for all kinds of things. I use it for, although only about code. I know a lot of people use Claude Code like to run their lives. I just haven't really got into that. Maybe my life isn't complicated enough. But I use it for all kinds of things with code. I use it for teaching me things. I use it for analysing code. if I need to understand it. I use it for generating complete projects sometimes if I just want something, or I want to understand how do you build a multi-container app on GCP for to act as the back end for a mobile app. And I'll get it to build it, and then I'll sort of go and look at it, and I'll deploy it, and I'll fiddle with that. I don't have large projects that I maintain on an ongoing basis. My work tends to be quite compartmentalized. But I do have a couple of hobby projects which I just use Claude Code to maintain them. But I sometimes just sort of for the hell of it, I just go in and make some manual code change, and that's fine too. But I do use it quite a lot I'll decide I need to change the library. I'll just get Claude Code to go and change the library for me.
Okay, interesting. Has AI made you more productive in the way?
Yes. I don't think I'm one of these people. I mean, I'm reading these accounts of some people, telling us that they're 5-10 times more productive. I think it's definitely taken out administrative work, which I find quite annoying. It allows me to produce content without having to necessarily get reviews from other people, or it allows me to take something much, much further without going to get reviews from other people. It definitely makes me much, much quicker if I need to write a small application. I mean, that's now, like an hour rather than a couple of days. So yeah, in my view, it definitely makes me quite a bit quicker. On the administrative side, it's saving hours per week, and I haven't got very complicated administrative requirements. I'd say for the kind of content production, it's not dramatic, but it's maybe saving me 20-30% of the time than if I just started on a blank screen and did it all myself and did all my own research. But of course, with research, you have to be super, super careful. You're checking everything. As I've caught Claude Code and Claude Chat, I think using different models, definitely making things up when I've asked it for how would you go about this, or I want to explain this point, generate me some bullet points and then suggest some slide outlines, and it's generated 6 bullet points, 4 of them are fine and 2 of them are nonsense, and so you have to be super, super alert to checking everything.
Cool. Okay, in this session I have personal question. Okay. Do you still write code?
For fun, I do. Yes, I tend not to get paid to write code very much anymore. I get paid more to look at code because people want a view on their system, and I nearly always say, "Well, I'll need to see some code as well as talking to you and looking at your documents." And sometimes people are quite resistant to that. Actually, I think they think it'll take too long, or they don't want to see it. But so I read code for money. I write code for fun.
Okay. How do you keep learning new technologies or programming language?
Yeah, I try to. To be honest, there's a couple of things on my backlog at the moment, which I'm hoping over the summer I'll be able to spend a bit of time looking more at. I used to dabble in functional languages, and I've not touched them for several years. So I'd like to go back and look at just how they've evolved and which ones people are using actually now. I mean, I think F# used to be more popular than it is now. I'd be interested to work out how those people gone to Elixir or something else. I'm always interested in, I come from data and networks, distributed systems background, so I'm always interested in what the cloud vendors are producing. In terms of other languages, interesting ones I think Rust is very interesting. I know just about nothing about Rust, so I'm aiming to change that. And I try to just keep up to date with what's going on in my main ecosystem, which is Java.
What do you think about Rust as a language programming?
Go?
Rust.
Rust. As I said, I don't know much about it. The thing that appeals to me about it is it's got quite formal foundations, and I started my career working in formal methods. It's got quite formal foundations, and it's all about reliability and safety, and those are things that I think the industry massively under prioritizes. you only have to look at JavaScript. I mean, it's my least favorite language because I'd say if you wanted something that was safe and rigorous and predictable, it's the opposite. You know, it's thrown every kind of lesson in that area out. I understand why it was done, and I see people are very productive in it. I completely get it, but that's what appeals to me about Rust. What I'm intrigued about is I've heard repeatedly that it takes a long time to learn and it's quite difficult to use, and that's why I'd like to experiment with it, because if a language is too difficult to use, we all know what happens. Mainstream adoption just doesn't happen because people don't feel productive quickly enough. So that's the open question in my mind about Rust as to what's it really useful for, and is it usable enough that I think I could introduce it to a client software team that wanted to get off Python, say, rather than Java, and say, well, you should use Rust instead. I'm completely open-minded on that at the moment, but that's the question I'm aiming to answer for myself.
Okay. What gets you curious after so many years in software?
What keeps me curious, I'm still just, I've always been interested in design, even outside software. So I'm interested in design of other things, industrial design, architecture, and so on. And so the design aspect is constantly evolving. And I'm always interested by the implications of new things. Now, AI is absolutely classic one. How do you take a deterministic core and a non-deterministic module and make them work together? I think it's a really interesting design question. So that keeps me very interested. And I just find software and computing very interesting and quite fun. I still get a thrill out of automating something. So I think it's the thrill of automation, which is quite childlike, really. It's that thrill of building something that does something by itself, and you don't need to supervise it. I still find that great fun.
Excellent. What book has influenced you the most?
A book? Oh gosh, I don't know if I can point to one. The Mythical Man Month, Fred Brooks's book, is very much. His other book, The Design of Design, that hardly anyone has read. If you haven't read The Design of Design, I recommend it if you're interested in design. It's a very thought-provoking book. Some of Martin Fowler's, particularly his early books, his business analysis book, I think that was very influential when I picked that up. Some of the early Patton's books. In software architecture, I guess Mary Shaw and David Garland's original software architecture book, a very slim white volume. I actually had the privilege of meeting Mary Shaw earlier. It was last week. She was in Europe for an event, and I got to talk to her again, which was wonderful. And I think probably that book, when I found it, and plus the 4+1 paper, they were really influential in how I was thinking about software architecture, even the fact that it existed.
What habit has helped your career the most?
Oh gosh, what habit? I think a habit of asking questions. I have a habit of not accepting the first answer I'm given and continuing to ask questions, which has been now sort of semi-formalized as 5 whys, hasn't it? I think I like that kind of approach. Some people find it very annoying, but actually I think it's being inquisitive enough to keep asking questions is a really important skill. The other thing I would say is keeping an engineering logbook, which very few people do. I was taught to do it at university, and I've just continued for 30 years. It's writing down what I'm achieving today, what I do to achieve it, what I've learnt, and then at the end of the day or the end of the week, you go, how did I do? What do I still have to do? What have I done badly? What do I need to improve? I found that to be a useful exercise in both addressing my rather poor memory as to what on earth have I done this week, but also creating almost artificial points in the week for a bit of reflection.
Okay. What advice would you give to your younger self?
Remember that people are more important than machines, because I was very focused on technical skill and technical capability when I was a graduate. And it was about 3 or 4 years into my career, 3 years maybe, I had the privilege of meeting a particular person. She was my software engineering director at the time, and by pure luck, she became my mentor. Her name is Kim Lambert, and she has recently retired, actually, from quite a distinguished career in UK large-scale software delivery. for a number of firms, most latterly Fujitsu, I think. And she was the one who pointed out to me, if you're going to have any impact, you need to deal with people. Because if you just work with the machines, you'll never have much impact. And she really changed my thinking about what was important in a career.
What message would you like to leave for software engineers or software architects?
Our profession is not about to disappear because of AI. So continue to work thoughtfully, because it's thoughtful analytical work that will differentiate software engineers of all sorts as we adopt more and more AI into our workflows.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Owen, for this time, for your time.
Thanks for the invitation. Good to talk to you.
Okay. See ya.